Hi, this is our AP Stats project by John Christopher Edmalin, Declan Burke, and Eugene Choi. And we're going to be talking about is there a relationship between a county's minimum wage and crime rate? Design of study. Our question was initially prompted by a desire to know if an increasing minimum wage would correlate with a lower crime rate. We believe that as minimum wage increased, people might have less reason to commit crimes. Using a random sampling of 100 counties, we researched the crime rate and corresponding minimum wage for each one, then evaluated the relationship between them. Using a hypothesis test, slope values, and confidence intervals, we evaluated correlation between these two variables. The parameters were n equals all counties in the United States, and beta equals true slope of the graph relating a county's minimum wage and crime rate. Hypotheses. The null hypothesis was beta equals zero, and the alternative hypothesis was beta is less than zero, and our alpha was 0.05.
So in our planning phase, we realized that we needed to use a t-test for the slope because we had two quantitative variables, and performing a t-test for a slope would allow a viewing of a linear correlation between the two quantitative variables, assuming that there is. In order to use this, we had to make sure that our conditions for inference were met. So our random condition was met because we had simple random sampling through randint, and this allows for us to see an unbiased estimator of the slope. We also have large counts met because n is equal to 100, which is greater than 30. This means that our sample distribution can be assumed to be normal. And we have our 10% condition met because our n equals to 100, which is less than 10% of 3,136, which is our population. This makes our formula for the standard error valid. And of course, we can see that our residuals have no leftover form from this dot plot of the residuals. This means that we can assume that the form is linear, making a slope valid. So in order to collect our data, we made a list of 3,136 of all the 3,136 counties and assigned a number 1 to 3,136 to each. From there, we inputted randint 1 to 3,136 onto our calculators. We ran this function enough times to get 100 unique values, and then we would choose the counties on the list with the corresponding numbers. We then found and recorded both the crime rate and the minimum wage for each county that was selected, and then we plugged those values into a calculator for a t-test for the slope. So here are our graphs and summary statistics. From that graph, which has crime rate of incidents per 1,000 people on the y-axis and a minimum wage of dollars per hour on the x-axis, our correlation coefficient is negative 0.001, which means it is a negative association, but a very, very weak one. Our equation is y is equal to 41.1145 minus 0.0082x, which means our y-intercept, assuming that um, assuming minimum wage was equal to 0, was 41.1145. That's a predicted crime rate. And our slope was negative 0.0082. So assuming that minimum wage went up 1, crime rate would go down by 0.0082. And our p-value for this slope was actually 0.991, and our test statistic is negative 0.011.
So for the analysis of that data, first we're going to start with the test statistics, which we found to be negative 0.011. And what that test statistic essentially means is that it is the values that we found for the mean is that there's 0.011 standard deviations below the mean, which is relatively close to 0 as we found in the hypothesis. The p-value of 0.496, this is relatively large and it's a lot greater than our level of alpha of 0.05. So assuming that the null hypothesis is true, this is the probability of attaining the same sample slope or more extreme given a similar sampling method. And our confidence interval that we found, we are 95% confident that the interval from negative 1.498 to 1.482 captures the true slope of the data. So for our conclusion, Because the p-value is much greater than the alpha, there is no convincing evidence that there exists a correlation between a county's minimum wage and crime rate. And as a result, we fail to reject the null hypothesis. There is no relationship that we can see in this data between minimum wage and crime rate within the United States counties. Now, since we did reject the null hypothesis, there is a possibility of a type 2 error as we fail to reject it, given that the possibility that the alternative is actually true. Limitations and possible improvements. So one limitation that we faced was time frame for the data. So kind of limiting ourselves within a certain scope of time. The crime rate data also lacked reliability between sources, and we wanted to choose, one specific site for the data. And we could only sample 100 countries. So if we wanted to increase power of the test to get a more resounding answer, we should probably increase, and we propose to increase sample size to increase the power of the test. There's also a possibility of random error within the data that could also prove to be a limitation within the study. One possible improvement is that since we do have information on every single county within the United States, a census of the population is much more plausible. And finding a reliable source of crime data would also be a great improvement, as we can get a more accurate depiction on what the relationship between these two variables are. So looking for general consensuses for sources and look to the most consistent numbers. Thank you.